morning, I'm Claire Murphy. Welcome to the Solo Bureau. If you receive NDIS funding, the headlines of late have probably been pretty terrifying. With the government looking to crack down on spending, they're talking about removing the funding from certain areas that are life-changing for those who use those supports. Alex is going to join us and explain from someone on the financial support what exactly that means for her quality of life. But let's get to the first leg of today's Solo Bureau. What's been happening while you've been sleeping? Here's the headlines for Thursday, June 11. Actually, before I do that, to those who've said they love this next little piece of music, Jen nailed it yesterday when she messaged me to say it gives Bridgerton vibes, and that is exactly why I chose it. US President Donald Trump has revealed that military action against Iran is not complete after blaming them for bringing down an American Apache helicopter. The two crew members of the chopper, which was patrolling the Strait of Hormuz, the shipping channel that's been the centre of the spike in global oil prices as Iran locked down the waterway in response to the US-Israeli war, were rescued by a sea drone on Monday, the US claiming the aircraft was taken out by an Iranian drone. Iran has not claimed responsibility for the attack, but Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi wrote on X, "Leave our region if you want to be safe." The US responded by launching a series of strikes against Iran's air defense systems, ground control stations and radar sites. Iran, in turn, also launched strikes targeting US bases in Bahrain and Jordan. The Kuwaiti military said they also intercepted an attack. It's not clear if any US personnel were injured or if there was any damage. 3 hours after the initial wave of strikes, the US released a statement saying the mission was complete, but in a press conference overnight, Mr. Trump said that's not the case.
We'll see what happens, but we hit them hard yesterday, and we're going to hit them again hard today, in case you miss it, in case you don't turn on your television set. And we'll see what happens with the deal. We were really close to a deal, but they keep tapping us along. They keep playing us for suckers because, you know what? They dealt with some very stupid precedents. I have to say that. I'm embarrassed to say it.
It's not clear where this leaves April's fragile ceasefire. The 24-year-old man accused of participating in the December Bondi massacre has been charged with an additional 19 offences. Naveed Akram and his father, who was shot dead by police during the attack, allegedly shot and killed 15 people last December as they celebrated the Jewish religious holiday Hanukkah at Bondi Beach. He was initially charged with 59 offences, including 15 counts of murder, 40 of attempted murder and one of committing a terrorist attack. Yesterday, the Commonwealth prosecutor added 19 more, 10 counts of shoot at with intent to murder, 6 of discharging a firearm with intent to resist arrest, and 3 of causing wounding or serious bodily harm with intent to murder. We also got some insight during these court proceedings as to the amount of evidence currently having to be considered in this case, the prosecutor telling the court they were dealing with 230,000 CCTV images, as well as content from numerous devices, with some material requiring translation. Mr. Akram has yet to enter a plea. Neil Daniher's family has vowed to keep his legacy alive and play on to continue his quest to find a cure for motor neurone disease. The AFL figure who passed away from the disease aged 65 back in May was farewelled at a state funeral at the MCG yesterday, attended by more than 5,000 people who, in their blue MND beanies, formed a guard of honour as the hearse carrying Daniher's body drove from the ground for the final time. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese delivered a eulogy where he called Daniher a hero who fought for a world where families don't lose their loved ones to the cruel disease that Daniher referred to as a beast. His daughter Loz spoke of her father as a man who didn't complain despite his condition, vowing to play on for him. With Christmas just 6 months away, new research shows more than half of all Aussies think the country will experience an economic crash by then. The research conducted by Finder, the group behind the Consumer Sentiment Tracker, found that 64% of Australians fear an economic crash by the end of December, with 13.7 million believing the country will be in recession by then. 42% of Australians also currently have less than $1,000 in savings. Sarah Megginson, personal finance expert at Finder and the author of the book How to Raise Rich Kids, said people are very nervous about money right now.
Aussies are stressed about the state of the economy, and families all over the country are feeling a bit of a financial squeeze, with many people worried that things will get worse before they improve. While a recession isn't necessarily guaranteed, the fact that so many people expect us to have one shows just how anxious they are.
Meghanson's advice to prepare for a potential recession is to reduce unnecessary spending and prioritise building up your emergency savings.
Families in particular are becoming more cautious about spending and they're hesitant to take on new debt. Economic uncertainty is scary, but taking a few proactive steps today can help you feel much more in control of whatever comes next.
Taylor Swift has taken to the stage at the premiere of Toy Story 5, singing the song she wrote for the movie live. Swift, dressed in a full-length yellow gown, sat at the piano and sang "I Knew It, I Knew You" for the crowd. She's been a long-time fan of the animated franchise, saying it meant the world to her to now be a part of it.
Life has ways of leaving those days behind, but seeing you tonight, I remembered I loved you. Came back when I met it, I saw you standing there in the light of the window, wearing that same smile. And it's been a while, but I knew it, I knew you. I knew it, I knew you.
After performing her song, she then brought Randy Newman onto the stage, the composer of many songs from the Toy Story world, the pair singing "You've Got a Friend in Me" from the first movie, which was released back in 1995. Members of the voice cast were there for the red carpet event, including Woody's Tom Hanks and Jessie's Joan Cusack. Toy Story 5 will be released on June 19. Okay, that's all for the headlines today. If you're stepping off at this station, have a great day. We'll catch you back here tomorrow. But if you haven't already, and so many of you have, thank you, get on board the Solo Bureau Substack community. The link is in the show notes. You can become a member and hang out with us, talk about what's going on in your world and what stories you might want the Solo Bureau to cover. If you're staying, we're catching up with Alex next. She receives NDIS support and is terrified some of it is about to be taken away. We find out what that means for her and so many others as the government looks to reduce NDIS spending. Earlier this week, the Senate began 3 days of hearings into legislation that would allow the Albanese government to make the biggest cuts to the National Disability Insurance Scheme since it was launched in July 2013. Given just 2 weeks to prepare them, the public were asked to make submissions to the 113-page bill that came with no less than 300 pages of explanatory notes. Advocates from the disability community have slammed the amount of changes and the speed at which they seem to be being made, but the government says they need to ensure the scheme remains viable for future generations, looking to rein in the cost of the $56 billion support program. They plan to do so by tightening eligibility requirements, which is expected to cut off around 160,000 current participants, a cut to social and community budgets, and capacity building support like therapies, and reining in the annual growth of the scheme from 10 to 2% by 2028. Overnight, one of the original architects of the program has warned that forcing all NDIS participants to have their impairment reassessed before receiving any ongoing support is unnecessary, disruptive and costly. Disability provider Aruma, whose CEO Martin Laverty helped design the scheme and was its inaugural agency director, said they broadly supported the changes, but with all the participants' eligibility requiring reassessment based on how much their disability impacts their day-to-day life, for people with a lifelong disability, children in out-of-home care, and those receiving supported independent living, Aruma says the reassessment is clinically unnecessary and potentially harmful. The changes will also give the minister responsible for the scheme sweeping powers that allow them to set funding and staffing levels for specific supports while reducing a participant's right to appeal. The inquiry is expected to deliver its report by the 16th of this month, with the government pushing for the changes to be implemented as soon as possible. According to a government spokesperson, the NDIS will still be the biggest social program the government has outside of the aged pension and the most comprehensive suite of support for people with a disability anywhere in the world. But while those who receive the funding fully understand there's not endless money available and that there are some out there who've taken advantage of the scheme, for the vast majority, it's changed lives in ways able-bodied people can't fully comprehend. Alex is 26 and has been, in their words, decently disabled since she was 15. Alex, thanks for speaking to the Solo Bureau. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
First up, can you talk me through what led you to applying for NDIS funding?
Oh, that's a big question. I was just really struggling. I don't have any informal supports, as the NDIS likes to call it. So I live in a different state from the rest of my family. So there was really no other way for me to get any support. Once I started to really struggle with everyday things and struggle to stay afloat, I knew that that's where I was heading and that was something that I would have to do.
Now, you have described in your own writings that you have several conditions that you're dealing with, but when you first received funding from the NDIS back in early 2024, you were only eligible for funding for one of those conditions. Can you just explain to me how that was explained to you, that only one of those conditions attracted support?
It was actually quite confusing, the phone call that I got from the planner, but she basically just told me that I had only been approved for autism and that my other two conditions had not been approved at that time. I was told that I would receive more information about why, but that never happened, even after chasing them up and being like, hey, I was told I was going to receive this information. I haven't received anything. We kind of had to go through a whole roundabout process of actually kind of forcing the NDIS to tell us why they hadn't accepted my other two conditions, because we couldn't appeal if we didn't know what they were looking for, what problem they had that we, hadn't given them enough information about, apparently.
So, and I know you can't speak on behalf of, other NDIS participants, but would you say that there might be others who would be in the same boat, who are suffering co-conditions but only get funding for one of those?
Absolutely. I personally know multiple people who are in that position, and a lot of people just end up giving up because it's so difficult to have to fight them to get these things added, that some people just go, okay, I'm just going to take the little bit of funding that I have and just make that work for me.
So, Alex, what does that mean when the government talks about tightening the eligibility criteria for those who may be relying on funding for just one of several conditions? I know you didn't love the wording of those, on low support needs, essentially being removed from funding.
Yeah, so it's definitely problematic. I personally know a few people who are very, very scared of these new changes because they maybe only have funding under autism, but do have multiple other conditions. And they're very much deserving of having supports, but they know that with all of these changes that they're potentially going to come under review and they could potentially lose access to their supports.
So you feel like those whose primary condition is autism are being targeted?
Absolutely. I mean, they've already said multiple times that they think there's a blowout of the amount of people on the scheme who have autism, when if you look at the actual numbers, such a huge chunk of these people are like myself and they do have other conditions. Autism just happens to be their primary condition.
Now, you said that you did actually finally get funding for all three conditions that you're dealing with. What impact has that funding had on your quality of life?
It's been incredible. It's kind of overwhelming. I just got my new plan in December, and I already had support work under autism, but now I have a lot of other things added. I've been able to get access to more regular physiotherapy. I've got podiatry added. I've got speech pathology added. Way more funding in assistive technology, which is really important. My OT has been now able to put in a bunch of requests for things that she thinks that I really need that we couldn't get before because they weren't claimable under autism alone.
And just to make it clear, one of your other conditions is MS, multiple sclerosis, which is going to require some, pretty heavy support in the years to come because it is a degenerative condition, right?
Yes, that was one of my big fights that I had with them. MS is on list B, which things on list B is basically things that the NDIS acknowledges most likely create a very high burden of disability, but that they still need you to prove that you are at that tail end. Like, you can't just say, I have this condition, therefore you should give me money. You have to show that you have impairments still as a result of that condition. So that's what I had to do. And they were very strict about it.
Right. So it's not an easy system to navigate.
No. And any logical person would, think that it's pretty straightforward. It's, at times it looks straightforward. You go, oh, okay, I get my letters from my specialist and I submit them. But it's not.
you've got some of these things in place for you now that are helping to support you in your daily life. I understand you're now able to hold down a job and, you're much more a part of your community. But one of the things that the government is really specifically talking about removing funding for is social and community budgets. What does that funding do for you, and what will that do if it's reduced or removed?
I know that there's this kind of societal perception that when people are going out in the community with their support workers, they're going to the movies and having coffee and just kind of doing like really unnecessary things. But I use my community and participation budget for going to the supermarket, going to the pharmacy, going to my hospital appointments, going to my other NDIS supports, like, traveling to see the physiotherapist and things like that. And most people I know use it in that same way. I would say it's actually less common to use it to go out and just, do a one-off thing like that than it is to use it for actual everyday supports. It was actually one of the things that I fought to get raised because it was the only budget in my last plan that I completely spent all of, since I didn't have very much funding under Autism Alone. That was, just me going to appointments, going to the supermarket, doing things, that I need to survive and to maintain my life. At the moment, I think I have just over 2 days a week of enough accessing the community funding. And with the proposed cuts, they would bring that down to about 1.5 days. And that's just not enough. Like, imagine if you only had 1 day a week that you could go outside and get everything that you needed to do done. It's just not possible. As it is, an appointment at the hospital alone can take like 3 or 4 hours. So it's just, I don't know who's coming up with these ideas, but they're not really thinking about the real world implications of this sort of thing.
Well, speaking of that, I know you've kind of touched on it already, saying there's a fair bit of fear happening at the moment. What is the vibe in your community right now, knowing these changes are coming in pretty fast by the sounds of it?
Kind of since the first lot of changes in October last year, there's been a lot of widespread fear in the community because there's also not a lot of clarity and transparency from the government throughout this whole process of telling us exactly what the outcome is going to be of these changes. If you take the ICANN, for example, which is the assessment tool that they want to bring in, the standardized assessment that they want to then apply to everybody so that they don't have to spend money on occupational therapists anymore, they haven't told anybody how they're going to use that tool to then translate that into hours of funding. And so therefore people are very worried and they're very scared because they don't even know what's happening. They can't even understand what's happening. So then, of course, naturally, there's no way to know if that will be fine or not, because they don't even know what the outcome's going to be. So with these news changes, it's a little bit the same. Some of them have an obvious outcome, like the accessing the community one. We all know, okay, they want to cut it by 30%. It's going to be less that. Some of the other changes, they haven't quite spelt out exactly what that's going to mean for people. And it causes so much fear and stress. And I just see it every day with people that I know personally, and also just the general community online at the moment. The disabled community is just full of people, kind of freaking out and being like, I don't know how I'm going to survive when they put these changes through.
Alex, thank you so much for sharing your experience of the NDIS with us. We wish you luck in the future, depending on how these cuts land for you. But thank you so much for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Author, actor, advocate and writer Hannah Divney addressed the Senate Commission this week, leaving those who are voting on the bill to cut NDIS funding thinking about what impact that will have on those who lose access to this life-changing support.
When disabled people die as a direct result of this bill, and they will, their blood will be on your hands. How do I know people will die? Because you will have made it impossible for them to live.
If you're concerned about your NDIS funding being cut, I'd love to hear your stories. Sign up to the Solo Bureau Substack and share what's happening to your funding and what that might look like, not just for you, but the team of people you have around you, because as I mentioned in headlines earlier this week, That support has to now come from somewhere if you're not getting it through NDIS funding, and quite often that falls to women to fill the gap. 71% of carers in Australia are women, so we understand there are going to be knock-on effects, not just for you, but for the people around you as well. Also, as I mentioned yesterday, I did reach out to Mark Butler, the Minister for the NDIS, and his team said it was too difficult to fit an interview in because he was travelling in Brisbane. Now, I understand I'm a new show and maybe not established enough yet to talk to, but also it is disappointing that we couldn't get a better understanding from him the thinking behind some of the decisions being made. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to spend with me. Tomorrow, we're whipping around the country to find out what's been happening in your neck of the woods. Till then, have a great day. Stay safe.